Welcome back to College Football Addiction. I'm going to talk a little bit of Notre Dame football, put things into perspective, and talk about next season with Joe DeLeon of the Ruffino and Joe Show. Joe, fan is short for fanatic. We've talked about this, and they're not typically reasonable. However, are they able to look back at the 2024 season and put it into perspective and be – you never like to justify losing or be okay with losing, but are they able to look back at it and say like, nah, that was a pretty good year? I know that we came up short against the best team in college football, but are they able to do that, or is it frustration for not winning it all, or just thoughts on 2024?
I think that a lot of Notre Dame fans are very grateful for the season that they had. And I think especially after the NIU loss, there was no expectation this team was going to do anything. Everybody kind of thought, oh, here we go. It's another 9-3 year. We're going to drop a couple of games that we're not supposed to, and we're just going to go on and win the Tony the Tiger Bowl or whatever they would end up playing in. And this is where a lot of the frustration, I think, comes in for Notre Dame fans, is that they were grateful. And then very specifically one fan base, LSU fans, a lot of fan bases were chiming in to stop on them and say, that's so pathetic. You shouldn't feel happy and excited that you made it to the national championship game because you got your asses kicked for 3 quarters. And then as soon as they go on the comeback, you kind of hear a little bit less of that. I think that for the way that Notre Dame was able to rally in adversity every single time was just so promising. That is the total transformation. And we've discussed this before for Marcus Freeman, is that they have gone down in situations. They have looked sluggish and just showing a little bit of pause and hesitation. And they've snapped right back. They have made some of the best second half adjustments that I've seen at Notre Dame in my time watching them as a fan and covering them. Their ability to bounce back, especially in the national championship game, is super promising. And the biggest part about all this, where I think a lot of Notre Dame fans look and think, wow, look, the future is super bright here. They had contributions from so many young players. And it's not just the Leonard Moores and the Christian Grays who started at corner for Notre Dame. It's Charles Jagasaw, who's coming back from injury and started in the national championship and was a little bit up and down, but had some really nice plays. And Anthony Knapp, who will be back from injury. We get Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price back. But more importantly, the real young dudes that were true freshmen, like Bryce Young, who had some seriously crazy flashes, who should be a premier starter and could eventually being a 5-star recruit, eventually be a first overall, or not first overall, but a first round pick as a defensive end. And the guys like Kennedy Urlacher, who's just a crazy, rangy athlete. There's so much promise knowing that the success came from the recruiting and the depth that Marcus Freeman has put in over the past couple of years. You ask anyone outside of Notre Dame, and they'll try to tell you that Notre Dame doesn't recruit well enough. I completely disagree. The way that the freshmen played was an indication that they are extremely well recruited.
Yeah, seeing them bounce back, like you said, from adversity, like the I remember after the Northern Illinois loss, we were calming FSU fans down, seeing like, well, at least Notre Dame's not good. Like, we'll have a chance up there. 52-3 Final Four later. Yeah. Obviously didn't know how bad FSU quite was at that moment. But yeah, the way they bounced back, not only from that loss, in the Penn State game, you mentioned, one of the guys, you didn't mention, backup quarterback coming in. And to me, that drive is still maybe the drive of the season. Because I don't think if they get those 3 points there, to me, that was such a big deal. And then bouncing back in the national championship too. I had a buddy that actually he sat in a section over from you. And when he went down to the Orange Bowl, and I didn't end up making it, but he came over to watch the national championship at my house. He left at halftime and was like, I can't take it anymore. I'm just going to go home and watch the rest of it at home, and got home and then texted me after the game and said like, hey, I feel better than I did at halftime. And I know that, moral victory or silver lining or whatever bull crap. You play to win the game, but I do think the way they bounced back was big. I also think that there's this, you mentioned the LSU fans, there's this mentality of like championship or bust, right? And I get it at places like Alabama and Georgia and Michigan and Notre Dame. And to some extent, because of their success, Florida State and Miami and Florida, I understand that. It is so unrealistic and it is so dumb. And the playoff has magnified that even more. You used to now the expectation always at all those schools was to win a national championship, or is, right? They put that on their preseason goals. But we were all fairly happy with like an 11-win season that ended in a BCS bowl and then winning that BCS bowl when bowls mattered. And that's what made college football unique is it wasn't this NFL or NBA or MLB mentality where you had to win it all. If you didn't win the World Series or you didn't win, hold up the Larry O'Brien trophy, your season was a failure. And college football was a little bit different in that where it took such excellence. Very few teams were excellent in college football. And that's what it took to win. That you were, did you wish you won the national title? Yeah, but if you won 10 games and then you went and beat Penn State in the Orange Bowl, which, Florida State had a chance to, that was a good year. And so I do think that for your older fan, your fan that's not so wrapped up in this 12-team playoff, and you just got to get hot at the end of the year. That's all it is. You got to get a good path and get hot. And I think your older fan is able to put things in perspective. Your younger fan, maybe not so much, right? But if you're an older fan, you do get it, right? What Notre Dame did this year was they had one slip up, and then they lost to the best team, the highest paid team in college football. It's really hard to look at that with any kind of negativity, in my opinion.
And also, they almost came back. This is the other thing, too, that you hear a lot of outside opinions on the national championship game. It's, they got their asses kicked. Oh, well, if Chip Kelly didn't take his foot off the gas.
I hate that.
It's so lame. Are we not going to sit here and act like, again,
Chip Kelly tried to stop scoring?
Right. The second half adjustments that were made by Notre Dame are not, that's not what's being brought up. That was where the success was, is that they adjusted on offense and they realized we need to target Jaden Greathouse. We're going to pick up more big plays. We can't run the ball. We need to just live with that. The only way we're going to get back into this is by taking shots and connecting with Greathouse and some other guys. And then on defense, they were a lot more aggressive and downhill and just playing with reckless abandonment because there was nothing else left to do in the second half. And they were able to get after Will Howard a little bit more. They were able to produce those big plays. That second half is where the positivity comes, because if it wasn't for a singular situation, and this is that one play, the catch by Jeremiah Smith has been broken down, and I think it's been broken down incorrectly by a lot of people. That was a perfectly called play on both sides.
Yeah.
It was the right decision on both ends. Notre Dame and Al Golden said, we need to just send everybody, and we need to hope that we get home. We need to hope that our guys, man on the outside, can do a good enough job. It just so happened that Christian Gray in this spot, Chip Kelly says, you know what? They're probably coming after us because they've been doing it the past few series. We're just going to set him up to go and get the ball, and he's going to come down with it because he's the best receiver in the country. And Christian Gray was not misaligned, but was not aligned with the proper leverage to defend a play like that where he was just running up the sideline. I think that the mistake that happened is that Leonard Moore should have been covering him and not Christian Gray, and there should have been some sort of safety help on him. But that was the right call on both sides, and it came down effectively to that, because if Notre Dame gets the ball back, there's a chance that they could have scored and tied it.
It reminds me of the Arizona State play, right, where they sent the house and then Texas scores on the touchdown to tie it up and then ends up winning. You did what got you there, right? And how can you fault a staff for doing what got them there? If they had sat, could you imagine, Joe? You'd have broken your TV if they'd have sat back in zone. If they sat back in zone and let Will Howard have 8 seconds to throw, or 4 seconds to throw, and he just found Jeremiah Smith or Trey or Ibuka on a slant, and they got 6.5, 7 yards, and then just finished the game like that. Like, man, you'd have been so frustrated because you said that's not our identity. That's just not who we are. So I'm in full agreement. It didn't work out. It's like the Ohio State play against Texas at the end of the first half where they just happened to call a screen when Texas was bringing a blitz. Like, they just got lucky that Texas wasn't in zone on that one play, right? Like, sometimes a great offensive play. I mean, we've seen that in the NBA, right? Kobe's going to hit a shot on a double team. Like, that's just sometimes it's going to happen, and you just tip your hat and you go to the next play. Unfortunately for Ohio State, there wasn't a next play. No. But I'm in full agreement there. Also on Greathouse, I'm still liking my Samardzija comparison after he went off in the Natty too. So, we mentioned quarterback quickly. Riley Leonard, mostly good, some not so great. But he was his toughness and really that first drive people will point to, and really the way he ran all year, his legs being that factor were pretty big. Replacing him is weird but different. Like you're not replacing like a Cam Ward or a Shooter Sanders by any means, but you are replacing a guy that very much was part of the identity. How good of a job does Notre Dame do replacing him? What do they look like there in 25?
I think that is the biggest question of the offseason, and it's going to be discussed a ton, obviously, as we're already having this conversation. But more importantly, there's no clear answer. There are three guys. I don't think that this is straight up Stephen Jelly like some people are making it seem. Stephen Jelly stepped in at the end of the first half of the Orange Bowl and completed a couple of nice passes. I think he is the billing of the highest floor and just a really good solid backup. Maybe he ends up transferring after the spring if he loses the job, but he fits that conversation of we know that we're going to feel pretty good about him stepping in, that he's going to be able to connect on the layups, but he's not going to go out there and bang threes and make some crazy windmill dunk. He's just not that type of a guy. Kenny Minchie is going to be a little bit more high ceiling and could be a splash player. And CJ Carr, of course, is in the mix. And I think a lot of Notre Dame fans are clamoring for him to eventually start because he is the big name, highly touted recruit, one of the biggest Notre Dame quarterback recruits that they've had in some time. I think, though, a positive indication here about the quarterback situation is that Notre Dame didn't go into the portal to get a quarterback. They could have. They absolutely could have. There were options for them, and there was the speculation that was unsubstantiated, in my opinion, that they were interested in Quinn Ewers. I don't think that was true. But the fact that they're always in a position to spend the money and to bring somebody in like they did the last two cycles of getting top options. Sam Hartman, Riley Leonard were both top options in both of those years. The trust that they have right now in these three guys, I think, is that indication of, okay, maybe that there is something here and that they think that they can at least unlock something from one of these players. It's not going to be as good as Riley Leonard was, but there should be a hope that they're still pretty potent on offense.
We talked about money, and I don't remember if it was in this segment or the last one, but there is the perception around Notre Dame that they're not going to. Well, I think we talked about recruiting specifically, but that they're not going to recruit. They're not going to bring in great guys. Speaking on money specifically, obviously Notre Dame has the means, right? This is a broke program by any means. But how committed are they on the NFL NIL front? In your mind, like what are they willing to do? Like, how would you? I mean, out of 134 teams, do you have a range of like, are they top 10-ish? Are they top 20-ish? Like, how committed are they there?
I think they're top 10, top 5. I think that they're extremely committed, and it goes to Mike Denbrock and how much money they spent on him. I know that's an assistant coach, a coordinator, but they're willing to invest money. I think that now, after this national championship run, it did so much, had such a positive impact in the marketing that they're able to do for future recruits. I think that Marcus Freeman is trying not to be super portal heavy. He's able to and attract a couple of guys at certain position groups that do need improvements. Like Malachi Fields and Will Pauling were two receivers that they added, were the two better players in this transfer portal class. But they've recruited well enough on both sides of the ball that they don't really need to go out and find starters. Instead, they're looking for depth. They're looking for rotational players. Kind of makes me think of like RJ Oben, who came in from Duke. He was a decently recognized prospect in the portal last year. I believe he was in the top 100 of the portal prospects, and he had a strong year. But his expectation wasn't start every snap. It was be a part of the rotation, get into the mix. He didn't have crazy production, but he had a couple of big important plays in certain games. That's what the approach is. In recruiting, high school recruiting, they're always in the mix for the top guys. And I think most importantly, they're always in the mix for the top defensive guys. Knowing what they saw and the young contributions, I think a lot of high schoolers can sit and say, wow, maybe I can get on the field early and maybe I can go out there and make a name for myself and earn even more money. There is, I think, a desire, an ability, and an attraction through NIL with this team. Notre Dame has a very rich alumni base, and I think that that's something that's constantly forgotten when you hear outsiders try to say Notre Dame doesn't spend the money. They got a lot more money than people realize. They got a lot of people, and they've got a really well established business school that has a lot of very, very rich people that donate back to the program. There is opportunities for consistent and continued growth because they have that. I just think that the biggest difference is they're just not as out in front about it. You know, they're not like a Miami or a Texas Tech or even I don't want to compare to an LSU, but like these teams that where you keep just hearing dollar amounts and you keep just hearing that like they're going out and spending and they're going out and attracting players. They're just not a little bit not as open it feels compared to other programs.
A big part of NIL too that I think people don't realize, and some have brought this up, right? So I don't want to say that nobody realizes this, is roster retention. right? You got to pay your guys to come back, and that gets overlooked a lot. Like
Yeah.
we heard the rumors of what Jeremiah Smith was apparently being offered, right, for to leave. Well, and I don't want to say that his value at Ohio State or like that Ohio State, didn't value him, but like to think that he went back to Ohio State or isn't
Right.
leaving. We'll see what the spring window holds, right? I'm sure more teams will tamper there, but I mean, Ohio State had to pay up too, right? Like, so retention's a big deal, and you don't see a mass exodus every year from Notre Dame, right? Like you do from other programs, like Ole Miss continually having to go back to the portal. You mentioned LSU, not that those teams don't recruit well because they do. LSU more than Ole Miss, but there's a reason they are having to go back. A lot of their guys do jump in the portal after the year,
Yeah.
and so you talk about NIL, and we think about the portal, we think about high school recruiting. A big part of NIL is getting your roster to come back year over year because guys are getting tampered with and guys are getting massive offers to come elsewhere. Most teams in the country would like to have some of Notre Dame's defenders on their defense. And just like most teams in the country would like to have, well, every team in the country would like to have Jeremiah Smith on their roster. I do think that that's a big part of it. And it gets overlooked sometimes.
Yeah, and I think too, one part that was discussed a lot during this offseason was the departures for some of Notre Dame's offensive linemen. They had three guys that entered the portal. That was the only position group that I think some folks were freaking out about, saying like, "Oh no, they're screwed. They lost a bunch of guys." Like I saw Adam Brenneman made a freaking vertical video where he didn't do any, didn't have any of the context necessary, and was like, "This is a really big deal." Rocco Spindler, Pat Coogan, and oh my god, the last guy's name is Sam Peddleton. Those guys that they're losing, we're not going to start this upcoming year. There is a very young group of guys that are very talented. Charles Jagasaw, Anthony Knapp, that were returning and coming back from injuries that were going to step up in those roles. Could they have competed for jobs? Absolutely. But those players, two of which were upperclassmen that are graduate transfers, and then Peddleton, who is a younger guy who just wasn't going to get into the mix. Those guys stepped in for injured players. They stepped in roles because the current situation this past year, they weren't going to play. Outside of that, to the point that you just brought up, they didn't lose anyone. Every player that Notre Dame lost was a backup. Everybody that they lost was somebody that was filling in on depth. Sure, that's not great to hear. That's not great to know that, like, hey, we had guys who had a ton of snaps that don't want to come back. But this is the modern era. People want to play. They want to get a shot to maybe get a look at the NFL. They want to make a little bit of money and start for another Power Four program. So that is the biggest part that you bring up. They're recruiting well in high school, and then a lot of these guys aren't getting frustrated to the degree that they want to leave. They're in it for the long haul, for the super long term outlook of after school and the money I make here, what I can do with the Notre Dame degree. I think that this crop of guys embodies that more than anything.
Yeah, it reminds me, people give Dabo such a hard time for not using the portal. None of his guys ever leave. Like nobody transfers into Clemson,
Right.
but nobody transfers out of Clemson either, with some exceptions, sure. But nobody leaves that program either, unless it's for the NFL or FedEx or UPS or whatever, right? Like they're not leaving, and so your need, like you just said, the need to use the portal is a little more limited. Last one, I've kept you over time, and so we'll go quick on this one. What are the expectations for 25? Like, is it to get back in the Final Four? Is it the expectations, high level, are to win it all every year. I get it. But, like, what are the realistic expectations for Notre Dame?
Well, this is one thing that I think hasn't been talked about yet by most Notre Dame folks, because we're still kind of relishing in the success that they had this year. Marcus Freeman getting to a playoff and getting to a national championship, the expectation is now a lot higher. This year, it was just like, hey, let's get to the playoff and see what happens. And what transpired this year, a lot of those expectations went up and down. But I think at the bare minimum, every single year, the expectation is get to the playoff, win a game. If they don't win a game this year, I don't think it's the end of the world in 2025. But getting to the playoff now has to be expected. Their schedule this upcoming year is very winnable. There are, of course, occasional going forward, there's always going to be the tough matchups that they schedule because they're pretty aggressive in doing that. But getting Texas A&M and having to go to Miami and having to go to Arkansas, those aren't going to be easy matchups. They're going to need to be super locked in, assuming that they can finish with at least one loss again. They're going to be a playoff team, and we should hope and expect that Marcus Freeman can replicate that. Not getting to a national title, that would be a little too lofty for a first-time starting quarterback. Returning to the playoff should be what Notre Dame fans are looking for.
Yeah, that opener down in Miami is one that I'm already looking at and saying,
Yeah.
"Oh man, cannot wait." The first week of the season really has a lot of
Oh yeah.
really fun stuff. Clemson, LSU, Florida State, Bama, Notre Dame, Miami. Even what Tennessee plays Syracuse, which is fun. So
Yeah.
yeah, there's a lot of fun stuff there. Joe, where can people follow you? Where can they find your work?
Yeah, you can catch me on Twitter at Joe DeLeon. And then Rufino and Joe show. There's going to be plenty of debates between me and Blake during the off season over, what teams are going to actually be good. Speculation season is my favorite part of the year. Of course, I'm joking, but thanks so much, DJ. Appreciate it as always. And I can't wait to catch up again soon.
Thanks, buddy.